Okay, all this sort of opposes the idea that human beings have never seen dragons and or dinosaurs, whatever you want to call them. Okay, in artwork. Okay, this is well known. Of course, there's Welsh and there's a Welsh dragon and a Chinese dragon. So these are completely opposite ends of the continent, of the, the continental system. They've got legends about dragons. And some of the artwork is quite interesting. So I just, what I'm doing here in all of this, I'm just picking out certain examples. There's lots and lots of examples. I've just picked out a few by way of illustration. Okay, next one. Okay, there's art form. There's, okay, these are from different cultures and different periods. Okay, I'll look at some more in more detail, but I think the top left, I think, is from America, and the one under it. The middle one at the top is Chinese. The one top right is Assyrian. The one underneath is Greek. The one at the bottom, again, is South American. The one on the far bottom, on the left, is, I think that's from Greece. So it's various different art forms, all depicting these so-called legendary animals. Okay. Now, this is interesting. This is from the town of Acámbaro in Mexico. And these are the remnants or the artwork of an ancient American Indian culture. The dates the dates are very different because the different sources I've looked at have given different dates. But 2nd century AD is the latest it could possibly be. Some say around about 10th century BC is probably where most of them come from. And these are clay figurines depicting various different kinds of known dinosaur, among other things. They're not all dinosaurs, but a lot of them are. And they're buried under the thresholds of houses and everything. And there's like thousands of them. They were discovered, first of all, by a German man who lived in this area in about the 1930s. And secular scientists have tried every possible way they can to try and say that he made them all himself. This is all a fraud, it's a fake, nobody could possibly have seen dinosaurs. But they've done all kinds of scientific tests on them. In fact, they found them long after this guy died. I mean, they found new samples of them, which he couldn't possibly have had anything to do with. They found ones that were buried under houses which were built in the 19th century, so he couldn't have anything to do with them. And they do a testing method on it, which is called, if I think about it, thermoluminescence, which is used for testing the age of pottery. And basically, you can measure the time since pottery was fired. So pottery, when it's fired up to a very high temperature, and then it cools, and then if it's buried or anything, or if it's just left, then radiation sort of accumulates in it and over the centuries. And if you use a certain method of heating, you can release the radiation, measure how much it is, and that tells you how old it is. And apparently it's quite accurate. And they do date back to about 3,000 years old. So they're not modern fakes. So the American Indians apparently saw live dinosaurs and depicted them, possibly for warding off evil spirits. We don't quite know why they made them, but they did make them. And these they're not all made by the same artist. They're all in different styles, and there's thousands and thousands of them. Okay, Utah, USA. These are, again, old Indian cave paintings. You see in the about 10th century BC, you see here circled. On the right, there's something that looks like a sauropod dinosaur, the sort of Apatosaurus, Brachiosaurus type of dinosaur. And on the left, which is not very clear, that's a human figure there. Whoops. So, and there are also, I think there's a goat on there as well. There are modern-looking animals on there as well. So, how did they know exactly what these creatures look like? Okay, carry on. Now, back one. Oh, no? Okay, it is that one. Okay, Chinese dragons, Chinese art is often very stylized. I mean, if you look at the way dogs are depicted in Chinese art, they're often not absolutely lifelike, they're very stylized. And often the dragons, so-called dragons, are very stylized. But here's one from 5th to 3rd century BC, which looks very much like a type of sauropod dinosaur. It's a dragon. Okay, it's a Chinese dragon. Okay. Now, the Ica stones from Peru. This is another, another Indian culture. These are burial stones. They're stones sort of around about that size. They're quite large. And they're found in the graves of the culture that lived at that time. And they're buried, you know, with the mummified bodies. And they contain, they have depictions of everyday life. And there's all kinds of things. There's, you know, they depict just everyday life, you know, buying and selling, normal things. But quite a lot of them have pictures of dinosaurs interacting with men. And if we see, it's not very clear on there, unfortunately, but the one on the top right looks like some sort of flying reptile with someone riding on it. On the right, there's a man possibly fighting something that looks like a Tyrannosaurus. Underneath is someone riding a Triceratops, which is a kind of possibly a lizard. They're not sure if the Triceratops was a mammal or a reptile, but it's certainly extinct. And on the right, there's also, very interestingly, there's pictures of man using certain interesting modern technology in the 1st century AD. He looks like he's looking through a telescope, and the telescope wasn't, when was the telescope invented in Western Europe? Much later than that. So, and there's also, I think they did, it shows pictures of them doing surgery, brain surgery and other kinds of surgery. So that's, early technology is a completely different subject, which is also fascinating, but that's something else which is not incompatible with the Bible. Okay. A Roman mosaic shows 2 interesting looking creatures fighting. 200. Long-necked, possibly aquatic dinosaurs. Okay. Now, this is a temple in Cambodia, a Buddhist temple, which I think is 13th century. Dates of the 13th century. You can see from the top picture on the left that it's completely overgrown with the jungle. You know, these trees, it's got these trees growing through it, and it's amazing. Sort of to look at these pictures. And there are, you know, there are all kinds of pictures on there. And on one of the pillars, there's a series of pictures of animals. And, I mean, it's got you know, an ape and, you know, various different known animals. And then there's this one among them. What does that look like without any? Stegosaurus, yeah. How would they know what a Stegosaurus looked like in the 13th century when nobody had dug up any bones yet? And, well, maybe they saw one. Okay. Now, this is from Carlisle. It's the tomb of Bishop Richard Bell, 15th century Carlisle, and in the cathedral. And there are some various brasses depicting certain animals, and a couple of them look like sauropod dinosaurs again, the Brachiosaurus type of dinosaur. The curators try and say things like, well, they're legendary creatures, they're just mythical beasts. Well, how can the mythical beasts look exactly like known types of dinosaurs? It's interesting, isn't it, really? Okay. And then the first dinosaur fossils were found 17th century, named in the 19th century, known as the Megalosaurus, which means a big lizard. Again, if you give it a Greek name, it sounds impressive. You know? So, okay. Are there any still alive today? Now, this is getting speculative now, okay? But it's an interesting question. This thing was dragged out of the sea by a Japanese fishing boat in about the 70s, I think it was. Apparently it stank, it was disgusting, but they took samples and they took pictures of it and then threw it back because it was going to contaminate their catch. But they certainly reckoned that it looked like something like a plesiosaur, which is not exactly a dinosaur, but it's an aquatic beast that lived around at the same time. Okay, well, of course, there's the lake monsters, aren't there? I mean, we've all heard of the Loch Ness Monster, but Loch Ness isn't the only lake in the world that has monsters. There are quite a lot, actually. One, for example, Lake Okanagan, that's in British Columbia, Canada. They have a creature called Ogopogo, which is seen quite often, apparently. And Lake Champlain is in Michigan, in Michigan State, just south of the Canadian border. And they have a monster called Champ, Lake Champlain, and there are eyewitnesses who apparently have seen these things. Well, why not? I mean, why shouldn't there not be large unknown animals that are difficult to detect, I think? Okay. For example, a plesiosaur, that's a drawing, of course, but some of the descriptions sound remarkably like something like that. Okay. Okay, the land-dwelling species. In certain parts of Central Africa, Congo, Cameroon, Gabon, is it? According to the natives, there are creatures that they talk about. Of course, there's lots of different languages in that area, but in one language, there's one that's called Mokele Mbembe, and it has a long neck and a long tail. It's a big, large animal, not very friendly, nocturnal. The name means it blocks the flow of rivers. And then there's Ngubu or Emela Ntuka, excuse my African pronunciation, but which means elephant killer. That's a land. The other one's in the water mainly, but this one's on land. And there are people who have claimed to have seen this. There's a huge swamp in the Congo called the Likwala Swamp, I think it is. And it's unexplored, it's unmapped, and the natives there claim to have seen these creatures. And there's even like Westerners who've been there who claim to have seen them, but they never seem to manage to get the photographs quite right. Of course, even if they did photograph them, people would say that they were CGI or whatever, wouldn't they, nowadays? But anyway, according to descriptions and eyewitnesses, they look like this. Mokele Mbembe looks like this, which could possibly be a small type of sauropod, which is still alive today. I say this is very speculative, but it's not impossible. Okay, and Ngubu is something like a stegosaurus called a styracosaurus, which has got lots more horns, and according to the descriptions, it looks something like that. So, okay, and then the flying species. These are reported from quite a few places, particularly Papua New Guinea. The Ropen, the Indaba, the Seki Bali, these are described as being very much like a pteranodon or something like that, okay? And also reported in Congo, Brazil, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the USA. Flying reptiles, Congo Mato or something like that in the Congo. So these are still reported today, okay? Scientific observations. Now this is interesting. In about the 70s, there was a lady doing sort of archaeological or paleontological research. There was a dig there, and they were digging up dinosaurs, and they found a Tyrannosaurus rex bone, which was quite large. It was intact, I think the femur probably of the Tyrannosaurus. And it was too large to get on the helicopter to transport it, so they broke it in two, and inside they found soft tissue and blood vessels. So there's actually, they said that, you know, they pulled the blood vessels with tweezers and they were still flexible. And since then, there's been several more found, which they've actually found blood and soft tissue inside dinosaur bones, so they're not fossilized. Of course, you can either say, you know, how you think of these things always depends on your preconceived ideas, doesn't it? You can either say, wow, isn't it amazing how blood has survived for 65 million years? Or you could say, there's no way that these are 65 million years old. I think the latter is more likely. Okay, yeah, okay. Carbon-14 has also been found in dinosaur bones. Carbon-14 is a way of dating organic material. Just very briefly, it depends on a lot of presuppositions. If you find something that's once been alive, like wood or skin or any type of animal tissue, then you can measure how much carbon-14. Carbon-14 is reactive. The 14 is the atomic weight. Normal carbon is carbon-12. Carbon-13 is about 1%. Carbon-14 is about 0.001%, I think, very, very small. And it's radioactive. So if you measure the amount of radioactive carbon in a living creature and compare it with the radioactive carbon in something that you've found that's very old, you can calculate the difference. The half-life is 5,500 years, and you can calculate it. Lots of presuppositions, but there is no way that even a slight trace of carbon-14 should be present after 65 million years. But there is carbon-14 in dinosaur bones, okay? And there's also carbon-14 in, incidentally, coal and oil, natural gas, and diamonds. And I think they always find carbon. You know, for a long time they said there's no point in testing it because we know they're hundreds of millions of years old, and so there won't be any carbon-14. And they try like mad to say it must be contaminated if there is any, but there is. And so, which means it isn't millions of years old, basically. Okay. Okay. Okay, so far. Anything?